Hello, Simon Raybould here. Really quick presentation tip. Oh, just so simple it's almost painful to say it. I want you to consider who you are presenting as and who you are presenting to. Now, I told you it was simple, didn't I? But the thing is, it flies in the face of some really bad presentations advice that I've seen recently. Bad advice about presentations. Let's create a new word called bad advice. This bad advice says, just go on stage and be yourself. The problem with that is it's only true up to a point because we are all lots of different people. For example, my daughter is staying with me at the moment and I talk to her differently to the way I talk to my wife who lives with me all the time, and that's quite appropriate. There are two me's, there's the father and there's the husband. So just think about which you is going on stage. Maybe you are presenting as an extrovert to a whole bunch of introverts. So maybe you want to find the bit of yourselves that is quieter and just let that to the fore so you don't freak out the introverts. Or maybe you're presenting as the boss to a member of staff. Now, that member of staff might also be your friend, but you can't have those two things on stage at the same time. And maybe, it's a new member of staff, so you don't have a relationship. And you need to consider whether they know the backstory of the company and all of that kind of jazz. But you can't just go on stage and make assumptions. Or maybe you're the newcomer talking to an established team, in which case you have to not take for granted that they know you, not take for granted that they trust you. You have to have more credibility work going on there and less familiarity stuff there. So I want you to think of this presenting as and presenting to as a filter between what I've got here is the message, or the graphs, and the audience, the dancing folk down at the bottom. Think of it as a filter. It doesn't stop what you say. It doesn't change your message. It just messes about a little bit with how you say it. And to illustrate what I mean, for example, let's suppose you want to consider issues of formality. Do you call them by their first name or their second name? And along with that, do you make personal references or business references or whatever? Now, I have to confess here, I've got this wrong recently. I misjudged a level of formality and personal references and so on, and exactly the same story that got me feedback such as the most personable and entertaining presenter I've ever heard, this time got me feedback as entirely inappropriate because I just misjudged the formality reference levels I was supposed to be using. And then there's the bit where you start to adjust the complexity of what you're saying, but I don't want you to do that because if we go too far down the complexity route, you end up with this risk of dumbing things down. Instead of which, I want you to consider this thing as a filter where you just chop out those bits of the message that aren't relevant to different groups of people. So for example, imagine you're telling the story of Cinderella. I'm kind of hoping you all know the story of Cinderella. That's an assumption, but let's just go with it for now. And you would tell a different version of this story. You wouldn't filter, you just filter it, you wouldn't change it, but you tell different versions of this story if you're talking to a coach hire service, because they're interested in how she got free transport and are there union issues involved. Or again, it'd be different if you're talking to children's services, because they would want to know how it took the fairy godmother 18 years to turn up and all of that kind of child labour abuse type stuff. And if you're talking to the cobbler's annual convention, they're going to be interested in the shoe. How does a glass slipper dance? I mean, how can you dance in a glass? It doesn't bend. So how can you dance in it? And how come when all of the rest of her costume changed back to rags, the glass slipper didn't? Okay. So it's just going to filtering things out. I'm not suggesting you change who you are on stage. I'm suggesting you let different bits of you come out on stage. So consider presenting as and presenting to. Just a really simple question to ask yourself before you start designing your presentation.